There are a number of motivations that tempt beings throughout life, many that cause some to do immense things, for good or ill. Love, hunger, fulfillment, guilt and curiosity are all excellent driving forces, but possibly the most powerful is fear. Some say that you should not fear power, only those that wield it. Yet power and fear are a dangerous combination. Many agree that it is not power that corrupts, only the fear of losing it. And that is evident in one member of the Morrowind Tribunal that loved their power too much. She was known as Mother Morrowind, the Sacred Lady, or AM, but mostly to all, she was Almalexia. Almalexia's early life is probably the most mysterious out of all the Tribunal, due to the fact that little is known of it. A myth circulates certain circles that the Daedric Prince of Domination, Molag Bal, oversaw 99 lovers of fellow Prince Boethia, who supposedly gave birth to Almalexia atop Mount Asan Bibi in Vardenfell. It has been suggested in the 36 Lessons of Vivec that she was a ruler before meeting her husband-to-be, the Chimer warlord Indoril Nerevar. The lessons say that Nerevar was a part of a caravan around this time, and despite him being a generation older than her, he and Almalexia were eventually married. Around the time of their marriage, it is likely that Almalexia along with her husband were in high positions of power, and that the fabled warrior poet Vivec was at least the junior counsellor to Indoril. The clockwork god Sotha Sil was Nerevar's advisor, and Vorin Dagoth was the Lord High Chancellor of House Dagoth. Nerevar's close friend, King Jumak Dwarf King of the Dwemer, presented to him and his wife wedding gifts in the form of two unique and powerful blades, True Flame and Hope's Fire, with the latter going to Almalexia. However, this was after many years of conflict between the Chimer and Dwemer, which mostly subsided around the Skyrim War of Succession between 1E369 and 420. Around 1E240, the First Empire of the Nords was established, only 2 years prior to St. Alicia's rebellion against the Aelids. The Nords expanded across High Rock and then Resdayn, modern-day Morrowind. The Empire lasted until 420, when the War of Succession ended, a civil war that Indoril Nerevar saw as an opportunity to drive the Nords out of his home. He allied with King Jumak, and together the two peoples forced the Nords out of Resdayn in 1E416. Soon after, Almalexia was wed to Indoril, and together they watched over their now free homeland. Following the war against the Nords, the First Council was formed, with Jumak and Indoril serving at its head. The alliance between the Chimer and Dwemer was mostly held up by the personal friendship of the two leaders, and even though under their leadership Resdayn prospered greatly, many of the people they ruled over despised one another. Before long, Cagranach, the chief tonal architect of the Dwemer, began studying the newly discovered Heart of Lorkhan, and secretly plotted to use it to ascend the Dwemer to godhood and create a new deity that would help his kin take all of Resdayn for themselves. Vorin Dagoth, who was apparently Nerevar's most loyal servant, soon discovered what Cagranach was up to. Indoril and Jumak exchanged words about this, but due to the Dwemer King's ignorance of his engineer's scheme, the Dwarf King denied the claims of tampering with the artifact. Believing this to be a lie, Nerevar's councillors, possibly including Almalexia herself, urged him to go to war. He travelled to Holomeia to confer with one of his deities, Azura, and the Daedra confirmed what Vorin Dagoth reported was true. and that the new medium needed to be destroyed. Thus, in 1E 668, the War of the First Council began. Almalexia joined her husband and his advisors and generals in the fight against the Dwemer. 2 years later, the Chimera armies marched on Red Mountain, and there are a number of accounts that conflict with what exactly happened there during the battle. Some say that there were Nords, Orcs and even Khajiits present, others that the Tribunal, Almalexia, Vivec and Sotha Sil were never there. The first-hand and often partially believed is that of Vivec himself. According to the poet, Nerevar's forces were able to draw the dwarves out of their fortress and met them on the field where they met their end. The warlord, along with a small party including Vorin Dagoth, ventured deep beneath Red Mountain to confront the king. Indoril and Dumak fought, and both suffered from terrible wounds, but in the end the Deep Elf fell. Cagranach in desperation struck the heart of Lorcan with his tools, Keening, Sunder and Wraithguard. Thus, almost every single Dwemer disappeared. What happened next is even more contradicted in various sources, but what remains consistent is that Vorin Dagoth was assigned to keep Cagranach's tools safe until Nerevar could consult his council, including his wife. It was recommended that the tools, instead of being destroyed, be preserved in case the Dwemer return, and when the warlord and his council returned to the Heart Chamber, Dagoth refused to relinquish the tools. Whatever happened next is also contested, but in the end, Vorin, now Dagoth Ur, was presumed dead. Lord Nerevar died either from his wounds or at the betrayal of his wife, counsellor and advisor, as the Ashlanders claim. Nerevar's sword True Flame was broken, and Cagranach's tools were in the hands of the Tribunal. Almalexia, along with Vivec and Sotha Sil, swore to never use the tools, but they soon broke their oath thanks to Sotha Sil's words of a bright future where the Chimera gods were present, active beings. They siphoned the divine power of the heart, and the Daedric Prince of Dawn and Dusk, Azura, appeared and cursed them for what they had done. The curse was wrought upon all the Chimera. Their skin changed to ash, and their eyes red. Thus they became the Dunmer. Lady Almalexia was seen as the healer, protector of the poor and the weak, often willing to perform acts of kindness and intervene more than most, even walking amongst her people. While her close friend Sotha Sil often remained distant and secretive, she and Vivec took a very active approach when it came to leading Morrowind throughout the First and Second Era. The blessing of Almalexia was said to have done incredible things in healing and protection. While it didn't cure some diseases like Corpus, it prevented the infected from suffering their effects. Though she may not have been the writer Vivec was, she wrote considerably, but focused on children's fables and those similar to provide lessons to mortals on life. For all the Tribunal's power, however, not even they could win the war where Resdayn's independence was yet again at stake. When the Rayman Empire was established by Rayman Cyrodiil following the First Akaviri invasion in 1E 2703, it would be the beginning of an almost endless conquest of Tamriel, carried on by his successors. By 1E 2840, the Second Empire stretched across almost all of Tamriel. The only exception was Resdayn. In that year, the Fourscore War began, and Almalexia, along with her fellow Almcivi, proved to be capable leaders, allowing the war to continue for over 80 years before a truce was signed in 2920, following the assassination of the Rayman dynasty and the rise of the Akaviri Potentate. According to the historical stories, 2920, the last year of the First Era, Almalexia travelled to the Sigic Isle of Artaeum in Summerset before the end of the war. Sotha Sil had moved to Artaeum and acted as a teacher to the aspiring mages there, but one night Almalexia had a vision and concluded that without Sotha Sil, the war would be lost. Around the time of the Fourscore War, a town called Gilverdale, also known as Gilverdale in Valenwood, caught the attention of both Almalexia and Sotha Sil. The king of Sensual in Elsewhere at the time was Drozel, who was infamous for having the mentality of a child, though mostly he was mad. A Bosma bard from Gilverdale performed for the king at the palace in Sensual. However, Drozel was angered by the performance and communed with the Daedric prince Molag Bal, requesting for Gilverdale to be wiped off the map, and the Prince of Domination was happy to oblige. Gilverdale was engulfed in fire and completely devastated. Almalexia on her way to Artaeum passed through the ruins and saw a vision. With great worry, she carried on to Artaeum and informed her old friend of what she experienced, and the Clockwork god decided that something needed to be done. That something was the Coldharbour Compact, a private bargain between Sotha Sil and 8 of the most powerful Daedric princes to cease meddling in mortal affairs directly. The terms of that compact are still unknown, but it didn't stop the Prince of Destruction, Mehrunes Dagon, from laying waste to the capital of Morrowind in 2920. According to the 2920 series, following the death of her child and/or coven, a Dunmer witch named Terala summoned Mehrunes Dagon and sought vengeance on the Duke of Mournhold. For 4 days, a red mist hung above the city. Flashing lightning and strong wind was also present. The Duke and his people knew what was coming, and messengers were dispatched to the tribunal for aid. Mehrunes Dagon attacked the city before help could arrive. Flames covered its structures, smoke filled its streets, and Dagon's creatures rooted out and killed the inhabitants. By the time Mournhold was almost completely destroyed, Almalexia arrived along with Sotha Sil. Together they fought the prince in a battle over the ruins of Mournhold. Although the tribunes couldn't kill Mehrunes, they did manage to banish him back to oblivion. But in doing so, Am was gravely wounded. She was apparently brought to Balmora in Vardenfell and seen to by Lord Vivek's personal healers, and for 15 days she slept while Vivek himself stayed by her side. It was soon after that the Fourscore War was brought to an end, and the rebuilding of Mournhold atop the ruins of the city already began later in the year. It is written that Almalexia walked among the skeletons of the new buildings and shattered remains of the old. Mournhold would brim with life once again, only this time it would forever be the home of Mother Morrowind, and soon after that the Second Era began. Over 570 years later, in 2E 571, a common enemy would unite 3 peoples that would go on to form a strong yet unlikely alliance. The Kamal of Akavir, a continent east of Tamriel led by Adasum Dir Kamal, invaded northern Tamriel. Sources dispute the initial target of the invaders, but regardless, after marching through Skyrim, they ended up in Morrowind, at a central region called Stonefalls. Prior to this, the Kamal besieged and sacked Windhelm, killing Queen Mabjarn Flamehair and her heir, Princess Nirnhild, in the process. Once in Morrowind, the Dark Elves led by Almalexia and her general Tanvul of House Indoril resisted the invaders, but it was apparently a fighting retreat, until the Nords arrived. Prince Yoren, one of the last surviving members of Windhelm royalty, pursued the Akaviri force and launched a surprise pincer attack, joining the Dunmer. It is also believed that Wulfharth, the undead Ash King, was summoned and fought against the Kamal, but this battle has its fair share of different stories. There are many tales surrounding Wulfharth, a number of them contradict one another. However, some say that Almalexia was the one who summoned the Old King, despite in life being a great enemy of Morrowind. Others though claim that Wulfharth was summoned by the Greybeards of High Hrothgar. It makes you wonder if Wulfharth was even there at all, but that appears to be one of the most consistent details of this battle. Though Almalexia was now being aided by Yoren, the Akaviri were still fighting fiercely. The stalemate wasn't turned into a victory until a force of Argonian fighters, led by an ex-slave, Heater Mean, charged in and joined their former slave masters in battle. The stalemate turned into a slaughter, and supposedly with the help of a tidal wave conjured by Lord Vivek, the Kamal were completely annihilated. This would lead to the formation of the Ebonheart Pact, a military alliance between several great houses of Morrowind, the Kingdom of Eastern Skyrim, and tribes of Black Marsh. It was an astonishing unification, as the three peoples had a long history of strife between them, and it was Almalexia that was a strong advocate of its formation. It was she who managed to convince the great houses, with the exception of House Telvanni, to join the pact. The pact would prove to be a boon for Morrowind, as the Second Era, specifically the Interregnum, was a period of extensive turmoil. Following the Soul Burst in 2E 578, the Three Banners War erupted. The Daggerfall Covenant, the Ebonheart Pact, and the First Old Mary Dominion all saw an opportunity to defeat the corrupted imperial regime and take the Ruby Throne. The chaos continued for many years until Tiber Septim finally united all of Tamriel under his banner. Morrowind fared better than most during this time, mostly thanks to the combined leadership of the Tribunal. But despite the Alliance War and the threat of Molag Bal's plane meld, each of the Olm Civi had a more personal conflict closer to home. Around 2E 582, the region of Deshan in southern Morrowind was endangered by a secretive cult known as the Maulborn. The son of a faithful member of the Tribunal Temple, Miram Vox was executed by Almalexia for his crimes, support of the Daedra, and the denouncement of the Tribunal. His mother was Magistrix Aurili Vox, and upon her son's death, she withdrew from the temple and vowed revenge on the three, especially Aem. As some would not be surprised, the Daedric Prince of Conspiracy, Boethia, spoke to her, and a plot to eliminate the three had begun. Vox led the Maulborn to pose as a group working to fight the Lotus Plague, which had spread from a village known as the Cirque across the region. It was eventually revealed that the Lotus outbreak was because of the Maulborn, in order to raise an army of plague husks, aggressive transformations of victims of the plague. Daedric wars beneath Mournhold in its sewers were reactivated by a captured Telvanni mage, and this allowed the Maulborn to move around undetected by the Tribunal. Cultists soon infiltrated the temple and opened Daedric portals within. Almalexia requested the help of the Soulless One to wipe the temple clean of enemies, but they were too late to stop the Maulborn from stealing the Judgment of Veloth, a powerful artifact that allows one to steal souls from those it killed. Vox and the Maulborn then moved through a small village named Selphora, and then onwards to the shrine of Saint Veloth himself. Veloth's spirit would bestow his blessing upon the Soulless One, which protected them from the Judgment's power. The Maulborn were now losing, but Vox still remained. She gathered her forces for a final showdown at Eidolon's Hollow, and the Ordinators of the Tribunal Temple surrounded them. The Soulless One fought their way through and confronted Urili. Vox struck down the hero, but the power of Saint Veloth allowed them to rise, and in turn strike Vox down. Thus the Maulborn threat was over, and Almalexia could focus elsewhere. "300 years later, after the rise of Tiber Septim and possibly the sack of Mournholm, in which Barenzia was the only surviving member of its royal family, in 2E882, Dagoth Ur and his kin awoke. The immortal High Chancellor and his minions were thought to have been dead, but somehow they managed to bind themselves to the heart of Lorkhan. When Almalexia, Vivec and Sotha Sil arrived to replenish their power, Dagoth ambushed them, cutting off their access to the heart. Before long, the three returned and tried to kill Dagoth Ur and his kin, and gain access to the heart. However, no matter if they did, their old enemy would have been revived eventually. The Sixth House had now arisen, and its threatening presence would be felt for another 400 years. It has been speculated that the armistice between Morrowind and the Septim Empire was signed by Vivec due to the threat of Dagoth Ur and the weakening of the Tribunal as a result. Imperial occupation of Morrowind caused Almalexia's city of Mournhold to become rife with political tension. The Imperials appointed a vassal ruler to Morrowind to rule the monarchy, while the Tribunal ruled the temple. Morrowind, unlike the other provinces, had a good deal of autonomy under the Septim Empire, and while the monarchy itself had power, the temple wielded most of it. Though there were no open hostilities between the two, people feared that violence would break out should a monarch ever challenge the Almcivi's rule. The threat of Dagoth Ur and his Sixth House took a toll on the Tribunal, who to others appeared no different. However, the continuous fights throughout the years in the Third Era and the loss of power affected the Lady of the Three the most. Almalexia was known to brood, the weakening of her divine power weighing heavily on her, and her kind nature began to subside as she became more and more harsh and unsympathetic. Around 3E377, she no longer walked amongst her people. But the real loss came in 3E417, when she and Sotha Sil lost Kagranak's tools, Keening and Sunder during one of their campaigns to Red Mountain. It is said Lord Vivec had to rescue them, and the loss of the tools effectively marked the beginning of the end for the Almcivi. Almalexia and Vivec no longer communicated. She ceased appearing in public altogether, and her old friend Sotha Sil locked himself away in his Clockwork city, meaning that Vivec was left to fight Dagoth Ur alone. One of the last great collaborations of the Tribunal was when they built the magical shield wall, the Great Ghost Fence, around Red Mountain. They realised that if they could not stop Dagoth, they could at least detain him. However, even from their prison, the Sixth House was able to expand and cripple the Tribunal. By the time the Nerevarine appeared 10 years later in 427, defeated Dagoth Ur, and possibly destroyed the heart of Lorkhan, Almalexia had changed. By 3E427, those closest to Almalexia at her temple in Mournhold began to notice that the Lady of Mercy was no longer so merciful. She was described as more of a warrior queen than a compassionate deity. The loss of her power over the years caused her mental stability to decline. She became obsessed with power, caring little for anything but, and she equally grew fearful of losing it. Those losing faith in the lady were perceived by her as needing to be punished, and when the Nerevarine arrived in Mournhold on a quest to find the assassins that attempted to kill them, Almalexia saw an opportunity to become the only god of the Dunmer. Despite the Tribunal having their own military-style orders, Sothasil's Clockwork Apostles and Vivek's Buoyant Armigers, Almalexia had her own private guards, the Hands of Almalexia. They were chosen from the most skilled warriors of the Tribunal Temple. Some said that they were the greatest warriors in Tamriel, but even if that was true, they couldn't protect their lady from her greatest threat, herself. Temple influence had started to become a problem for the then King of Morrowind, Llalu Helseth, son of Queen Barenzia. Conspiracies were starting to appear left, right and centre in Mournhold. The assassination attempt on the Nerevarine, the attempt on Barenzia's life, the goblin army that Helseth apparently commissioned, and of course, Almalexia's grand plan. AM's plan began to unfold once the Nerevarine was tasked to recover the Mazed Band of Barilzar, a powerful ring that allows the wearer to teleport between Mournhold, the Clockwork City, and Vivek City. Barilzar was once a student under Sothasil, and was eventually cursed to guard his ring as an undead lich. Once the ring was recovered, the Nerevarine met Almalexia, who spoke of her Nerevar returned, and how they should stand side by side as rulers of Morrowind. With that in mind, she later tasked the hero with restoring the shattered blade of Nerevar, True Flame. However, before this, Mournhold came under attack from Sothasil's flesh and mechanical creatures, the Fabricants. The constructs attacked the Plaza Brindisi-Dorum, but fortunately the Royal Guards, Ordinators and Nerevarine were able to put them down. To the people's surprise, a hole had appeared in the centre of the plaza, beneath the statue of Almalexia and Mehrunes Dagon, that commemorated her battle against him during the sack of Old Mournhold. Upon investigating the opening, the Nerevarine stumbled upon the hidden ruin of Bamzamshen, and the Fabricants of an unknown origin battling the Dwemer constructs within. It is unknown whether or not Almalexia knew about the Dwemer ruin beneath her city. It is likely she did, for so too did Sothasil. But fearing the loss of her power, and also due to her mental decline, she became enraged with a secret cult in Mournhold known as the End of Times cult, as they foretold the coming of the end of the Tribunal and the impending Oblivion crisis. Almalexia tasked the Nerevarine with entering Bamzamshend and activating something remarkable within, Karstang's Behar, a Dwemer machine that was capable of manipulating the weather above Mournhold. It was thought to be nothing but a myth. It turned out to be very real once Bamzamshend opened up. With her power waning, the demigod wanted to use the machine to create an ash storm that engulfed the city as a display of power for the so-called heretics. But there was another problem closer to home. One of the lady's hands, Salas Valor, became disgruntled at being the hand of Almalexia, and left for reasons that, apart from her change in personality, are not exactly clear. The Nerevarine was sent to deal with Valor, and once they did, it was time to reforge the Blade of Nerevar. Mournhold was home to some of the best smiths in Tamriel, but not even they could enchant such a vigorous blade. That required the aid of a Dwemer. Unfortunately, the last known remaining Dwemer alive was the diseased and crippled Yagrum Bagan back on Vardenfell. Luckily, Beneath Mournhold in the ruins of Bams Amshend was the spirit of a dwemer called Radak Stungathums. Radak agreed to enchant the blade after being provided with the necessary materials, and once done, True Flame lit up in all its glory with its magical flames. Now all that was left was to task the Nerevarine with dealing with the supposed mad god, Sotha Sil. Almalexia claimed that Sil had become insane after years of isolation and tinkering in his Clockwork city. She had the hero believe that the fabricant attacks on Mournhold was Sotha Sil's making, that he was a danger to all and had to be stopped. Unlike most weapons, True Flame was capable of killing one of the Almcivi, and so it was up to the Nerevarine to save Morrowind once again, though not from the Clockwork god. The Nerevar incarnate made their way into Sotha Sil's dome, but when they arrived, the wizard was already dead. Sil's lifeless corpse hung from a machine of his own making, and his murderer, his once long-time friend, Lady Almalexia. It appeared then that it was she who went mad. It was she who killed him. It was she who, by using Barilzar's ring, teleported the fabricants into Mournhold, all in an attempt to appear as the saviour of her people. That she was the one true God, and that there was only one faith, one rule, and all who did not yield would be destroyed. She spoke at length to the Nerevarine of her plan, and of her vision, and how she was the saviour of her people in her own twisted way. The Nerevarine was to be her martyr, and because the hero still lived, she attacked. After what was most likely a fierce fight, Almalexia was a living god after all. The Nerevarine struck the mad woman down. Her powers were no match for the incarnate. The Clockwork City was now a tomb for two of the once beloved tribunals. Azura claimed that Almalexia's death was a boon for Morrowind, for she would have eventually betrayed the Dunmer, as it was her curse. The prince also said that it would take time for people to understand her necessary death, and that of both Sotha Sil and Vivec, for they possessed power no mortal should ever have. Whenever the Nerevarine spoke of what happened at the Clockwork City, most didn't believe them. Faith in the tribunal was diminishing, but it was still strong. Over the next 11 years, temple faith reduced even more, until in the 5th year of the 4th era, Vardenfell was destroyed by the moonlit Bardau and the eruption of Red Mountain. As a result, temple worship diminished, and the secretive dissident priests established the new temple, where the worship of the good Daedra, Boethia, Mephala and Azura was promoted. They were named the True Tribunal, and the Almcivi the False Tribunal. Though Almalexia, Sotha Sil and Vivec were named as saints, for they may have been false gods, but they did their fair share of good for Morrowind and its people. Though Azura claimed Almalexia's death was a boon for Morrowind, and that the end of the tribunal was needed, it begs the question, was it a boon in the grand scheme of things? For following the end of the tribunal, things in Morrowind quickly became dire indeed. Vardenfell's destruction crippled the Dunmer, and a large Argonian invasion only made things worse. But the lizard folk were taking territory that once belonged to them, and some would argue that it was punishment long overdue for the Dark Elves. Almalexia may not have as grand a legacy as the other two tribunes, but her story teaches those who are willing to listen that even the most caring, the most kind have a darker side, one that they can always succumb to, given the right circumstances. She was, after all, a mortal at her core, a mortal who took the power of a god. Her story, like many of those she wrote herself, gives us a message or two to dwell on. Power isn't everything, yet the fear of its loss can make you lose everything.